All right, y'all. So, um, once again, thank you for your patience on working with me about the delay. So, in this lecture, I will record this lecture and finish through the rest of chapter 5. So, we left off talking about adolescent brain development, and if you remember from chapter 2, we talked about the frontal lobe being the last part of the brain to really develop. So if you look at 20 years old, so comparing that gray matter located in the frontal lobe, compared to that here, and then 12 years. So notice that, of course, it gets considerably darker, but between the ages of 12 and 16, so those preteen, adolescent years, it's not as dark, okay? So the idea is that when it comes to making judgments, making decisions, to some extent, there is some biological factors that are implicated in it. Now, when we think about the decisions that teenagers make, and we also need to be very careful to say that it's only because of their their developing brain, because at the same time, what you don't want to do is make decisions for people who are at this age. The idea when we think about laws or these very well laws, which are decisions that are made for you, right? Um, it's for a lot of, excuse me, with youth oppression, kind of like how we talked about it last week. Within youth oppression, there's the uh, invalidation of the adolescent's words or thoughts and emotions. And so something that we want to make sure that we're not doing is just simply saying because a teenager's brain isn't as developed, they can't make appropriate decisions. That doesn't mean, so the point is, just because there's a lag in development of the frontal lobe, that doesn't mean we need to impede on the decisions of a teenager or of a preteen. I think what I want to make sure I'm saying is that there needs to be conversations, and just because somebody um, may not be as older or have uh, a greater brain development, that doesn't mean that they're incapable of making decisions. There always needs to be a conversation. So I'm curious on your thoughts about that part. So going into cognitive development, we're going to be looking at Piaget as well. So remember, in Piaget's stages of cognitive development, um, the individual should be at the formal operational stage where they've mastered conservation, they have uh, they're able to see from another person's point of view, so you don't see as much egocentrism. And at this point, there should be more abstract thinking. Now, um, Kohlberg's proposed his own theory of moral reasoning, or the development of moral reasoning. So just as a quick disclaimer, Kohlberg, during adolescence, uh, this, well, let me go back. So Kohlberg actually suggested that uh, moral reasoning develops as early as about 2 to 3 years old. And during this stage of adolescence, that's where there is the incorporation of societal expectations. So let's see. So this is what I'm talking about. Makes more sense to look at a table. So there's 3 stages of Kohlberg's level of moral thinking. So there is an additional stage, but that's beyond that's beyond this course. When we're looking at pre-conventional morality, this is before the age of 9. So the main focus of this particular level is only on self-interest. What can provide me rewards, or what can avoid punishment? So if we're thinking about this example, right, if you steal the drug, you go to jail. So basically, if you look at it, obey the rules, or if you disobey the rules, then you'll receive punishment. Okay. Conventional morality. So this is about early adolescence. And the main purpose of this one is to uphold laws and rules for the purpose of social approval or to maintain social order. So if we go to this particular example, if you steal the drug, everyone will think you're a criminal. It's not the act that that is the concern. It's what people will think. So when we think about early adolescence, right, and those teenage years, those early teenage years, we're thinking about what people think of us. Post-conventional morality is more so beyond the focus of the previous two levels. So it's more about the abstract, the reflection of the belief in basic rights and ethics. So people have a right to live. So if you steal the drug, it's because people have the right to live. So when we think about morality, right, we go through these different levels, according to Kohlberg. Now, something to think about as well is how we move from concrete thinking to abstract thought. So these concrete rewards, right, or concrete punishments, to ethics. So we're demonstrating an evolution in moral thought. As far as the social development, Erikson's theory proposed that humans go through these various stages for social development. Now, we didn't talk too much about it in the infant stage, but the only stages that you really need to know is the identity versus role confusion. So when we think about adolescence, it's characterized by a time of people who are, yes, they're experiencing these hormonal changes, right? They're also experiencing additional responsibilities in regards to the interpersonal dimension, right? You're getting more friends, or you want more friends. So when we think about identity, we're during adolescence, the focus is on finding out who you are. Now, to say that you definitely know who you are by the time you're in high school, I don't know about you, but for me, I definitely experienced a lot of moments where I was like, I think I know who I am, and then it's like, oh no, I don't know who I am. So you never really get there. But the idea for Erikson's theory is more so about self-concept. So who are we by other people's eyes? Okay, so it's more of the we aspect, and that comes from the group membership that you hold. Now, with healthy identity formation, this allows you the capacity to build close relationships, given that you're able to build that for your relationship with yourself. Now, in the event that maladaptive identity formation occurs, so role confusion, that facilitates how we interact with other people. and really how we form those relationships. So these are Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. So if we look here for adolescents, identity versus role confusion, basically are finding a sense of who they are, testing out the roles and integrating them to make a single identity. But or they become confused about who they are. So we have all of these different stages, and notice that that for identity versus role confusion, this spills over into your 20s. Okay. Now, adulthood. So as far as adulthood, this is an interesting experience because our definition of adulthood has changed from the time that we were born. And I say we, I'm talking about my millennials, my Generation Z people, compared to the time of baby boomers. So when we think about, and also when we think about different countries, their version of adulthood is going to be a lot different from from the way that we define adulthood in the United States. And I'll expand on that. I'll expand on that when we talk about Western cultures. But for the purposes of this lecture, know that emerging adulthood begins from about age 18 to mid 20s. And so during this time period, it's very awkward because you're somewhat independent and then somewhat dependent. So there's adult responsibilities and some some things that you have to take care of, such as housing, getting groceries for yourself. And then at the same time, you might be living with your parents. It just depends. And it changes from person to person, right? You may have a job at this point. Now, when it comes to Western cultures, most Western cultures are weird countries. And when I mean weird, I'm talking about Western educated, industrialized countries. There is greater economic stability, greater economic resources. So some adults, and notice I'm saying some adults in Western countries, specifically like the United States, they're able to go to college and not have to jump right into work or caring for families. Now, in other countries where there isn't as much economic stability, adulthood is going to look completely different. And I'm not talking about it. Yes, I am. When we think about different cultures, right? Some cultures think that some cultures identify you as an adult by 15, whereas another culture identifies you to be an adult by maybe 19, or when you have your first period, or when you have your first ejaculation. It just depends. Now, not everybody is able to really experience emerging adulthood. And so let me back up. The point of not the point, but how do I find the words? So when we think about emerging adulthood, it's the period where you find your niche, you look for, you're still searching about who you are. There are some people, even within this country and in other countries, that do not have the privilege to do so, given that there's more so the focus on basic needs. So that's what I mean. Now, also, your book talks about this, I found it was really interesting. So in 1890, women, by the time that women were about 50, excuse me, girls were 15 to the time that they got married as women at about, let's see, 21, 22 years old, from when they got their first period. It's about 7.2 year interval. So this suggests that women during that time were married relatively young. Now, in 2006, we noticed there's a big gap, a 14-year gap, where girls are having their first period at an earlier age, and they're getting married at a later age. And this is not to say that this isn't for men either. Men are also getting married at an older age as well. People are also having kids, are having children, starting families with human children at a older age. So let's think about the role that careers and technology and education plays in all of that. So now there's more opportunities to further your education, to further your career. And what we do recognize around the gap for careers and for women, these are moving people to have families, to get married, right, at a later age. And also, it's expensive. Compared to 1890 to where we are now, it is expensive to have families now as well. So the point being is that for emerging adulthood, it's expanded from 18, even a little bit earlier, to the mid 20s, so about 25. And we're seeing this emerging adulthood because of socio-political and economic factors that are implicated in it. Now, so when you think about adulthood, it's broken up into different parts. Early adulthood, which is between 20s and 30s, middle adulthood, 40s and 65, and then late adulthood is 65 years of age and older. Now, within each of these stages, the development is widely different. So when we think about physical development within these stages, right? Early adulthood, you are at your peak, so that you have your muscular strength, your reaction time, you're more keen, and this is your prime between 20s and 30s. Now, from middle adulthood, you do see a physical decline, but this is more so gradual. And you also see a gradual decline in fertility, typically amongst women. Now, something to make note, in order for people to still experience or to slow down the physical decline, physical exercise and consumption of nutritious foods have been linked to it. So basically physical vigor, have been associated, and I'm saying associated, so correlated with healthy habits, or let me not say healthy, but adaptive habits and physical exercise. So the idea is, noting this for y'all, make note of, working out a couple days a week, and eating nutritious foods. If that's where you want to go. If you don't want to do that, that's your business. And that's something I respect, because I know for me, it's hard to really exercise when there's a pandemic, but you can always run. But that's beside the point. Do something that's your business. Now, for late adulthood, right? This is after 65 and 65 and up. So you do see a more steeper decline in physical development or your physical health. So as far as like the visual sharpness, distance perception, and stamina, these diminish. Um, you also see the weakening of the immune system. And so this increases the susceptibility to life-threatening diseases. So when we think about the coronavirus pandemic, right, a lot of the people that were impacted were older adults. You also notice a neural processing lag. Um, so basically, the regions related to memory, um, they began to diminish in function. When it comes to aging and memory, we do see a correlation. So the older a person gets, they're more likely to show memory related concerns. Now, that doesn't mean that all older adults can't remember anything. No, that's not the case. It depends. So when we think about early adulthood, it's the peak time for learning and memory, whereas for middle adulthood, there's greater decline in recalling memory than recognizing. So having to recall like where you might have left your car keys is going to be a lot harder than to, as opposed to seeing somebody's face and you immediately recognize, oh, that's Bobby. Now, for late adulthood, there's better retention of meaningful information than meaningless information. So, as far as meaning, being able to recall your anniversary or or if you're weird like me, the birthday first of your first dog. Now, when it comes towards the closer end of life, there's terminal declines. And that's about the last 4 years of life, okay? So we're going to be talking about neurocognitive disorders and Alzheimer's disease. So neurocognitive disorders, these are more so of the acquired disorders that have cognitive deficits. So you might see like the diminishing of cognitive and mental abilities that is not normal of that isn't typical of normal aging. So Alzheimer's disease is considered to be a neurocognitive disorder, and it's marked by plaques and tangles, and it often occurs with an onset after about 80 years or so. And so within Alzheimer's disease, it's characterized by a decline in memory, other cognitive abilities, and to some extent, movement. So if you're looking at the picture here, you have a brain with no sign of Alzheimer's, and you have a brain uh, with signs of Alzheimer's. So notice how vastly they're different. This one is a little less pinker. There isn't, well, diminished color. You see plaques here. It's not as tight. It's a little bit loosened. So that's the differences in the brains. Now, I do want to make note, people who are living with Alzheimer's disease, they recognize the deterioration of their memory and their reasoning. So it's not like they're completely unconscious when these things are happening. They are very much conscious, and I'll be frank, um, it is a very scary experience for that person. So a lot of times when we talk about Alzheimer's disease, especially with someone who is an older adult, we tend to treat them as if they don't know what's happening, and we engage in behaviors that are invalidating. And so it's important to remember that this person recognizes what's going on and it's scary for them, and it has to be almost really it has to be hurtful uh, for someone to completely invalidate that experience. And simply because, and there's a lot of invalidation that occurs towards people with Alzheimer's disease and even neurocognitive disorders, is because the people that don't have them are uncomfortable about it. Um, so I'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about ageism. So aside from the point, when Alzheimer's disease occurs, you see memory and then reasoning deteriorating, and you also see uh, some impact on emotion. So there's emotional flatness, disorientation, and mental vacancy. When it comes to neural involvement, um, you see a greater loss of brain cells and deterioration of acetylcholine producing neurons. So remember, acetylcholine is really important for memory and also muscles. Uh, and you also see the deterioration of critical brain cells and activity in Alzheimer's related area. So if we look here, um, comparing the areas of the brain of a of a I'm trying to find the nice word, a word, of a brain with without Alzheimer's compared to one with Alzheimer's. Notice the language areas here. Notice how you have greater spacings. Same thing for the memory. So you have space. You have like there's a lot of words, y'all. A lot of words, a lot of thoughts, not enough words. So comparing memory, right? Notice how these areas are rather different. Notice the ventricles here, greater greater space, greater space. Yes. When we think about intelligence, two different kinds, how we talk about it in psychology. Crystallized intelligence is your accumulated knowledge. So, what you get from past experiences, and it tends to increase with age. Whereas fluid intelligence is more so how can we apply the knowledge that we have? So, things like solving puzzles. What we see for what we tend to see is that as you get older, yes, crystallized intelligence goes up, but there's a point where there's a greater decline. Same thing for fluid intelligence when it comes to age. Now, when it comes to love, right? Within our society, it just across cultures too, there is the mentioning of love, of finding a partner. Um, some people might call it soulmate, but finding being a pair. When we're going to talk about it in chapter 13, for Western countries, there is the promotion of, uh, or I would say there's more of a push for people to get married, to have a family. And operating within heteronormativity, um, it creates this very narrow perspective of what love and marriage or relationship should be. When we look at heterosexism very broadly, and within that heteronormativity, it it basically says, well, let me back up. So heterosexism is basically the privileging of people um, who identify as heterosexual and marginalizes people who do not identify in that way. So sexual minority folks, right, as well as gender minority folks, and within heterosexism, it's systemic. Okay, it's not just simply interpersonal or personal, it's systemic. And when we look at these different systems of heterosexism, especially within the media, there's a lot of positive portrayals of happy couples who are whose genders are binary, who are cis women and cis men. Okay. And as far as like what we conceptualize as marriage, it's between between cisgender people, when that's very narrow and it's monogamous. We don't think about the ways in which relationships could be, because there's such a narrow view on there's a very narrow perspective on what marriage, what love, and what relationships look like. So consider that as we're going through this lecture. Now, when it comes to work, for example, this is interesting because when we think about Western societies, there's a lot of emphasis on work. And work is more so considered to be really important within Western societies, especially within the United States, because there's the sense of competence, accomplishment, and it provides a lot of self-definition for a lot of adults. Now, when we think about work, right, the definition of what work is changing. So compared to when I first started teaching Psych 102, let's see, it was 2 years ago. You were having some discussions around the importance of work and contributing to society and the adverse impact of that promotion on mental health. Now you're having more people say, I'm focusing on my mental health. And think about the changes between that time. 2 years ago, we didn't have a global pandemic. Now we have a pandemic, and it's exacerbated the adverse impact on mental health of people who do work. And we also it highlighted the inequalities and the exploitation of certain workers. When we think about essential workers, right? They are more so, how do I say this? They're more so exploited based upon the work that they do. So when we think about work, right, how we understand work, our definitions of work and the associated factors have changed from the time that our grandparents were working and their great grandparents were working to the time that we're at now. So a lot of times whenever I teach Psych 102, I like to ask people, what do they think about work? Now, a lot of times when we come into college or undergrad, we have this sense of, I'm going to do this kind of work and have this many kids. Great for you. But some things to think about. What kind of lifestyle do you want? Do you want to be married? Do you want to have a polyamorous relationship? Do you want to be, do you want kids? How many kids do you want? Do you want 1 child, 2 children, 4, 5? Do you want a fur baby? Do you want a dog? Do you want a cat? Do you want a gerbil? Do you want a hamster? Do you want a snake? A gecko? Do you want to live in a city? Or maybe you want to live in a rural area, or maybe you might want to go off the grid. Thinking about what kind of career you want. Do you want to travel for your job? How much money do you want to make? Does it matter to you how much money you make? Do you want to make 6 figures like Mark Cuban? Do you want to be like Jeff Bezos? you know what, different example. We are not going to use Jeff Bezos. Yeah. Anyways, do you want to make that much money? Do you want to be your own boss? Do you want structure? No structure at all? In essence, what I'm saying, and something to think about, and I hope you get to, is think about, what do you want? Not about what your parents want, not about what the next person wants. What do you want? And um, don't criticize other people for what they're not doing, um, or what they need to be doing, or what they are doing. You do it. I echo Beyonce's words: be about it, be about that action. Think about the life that you want. Do you want to have a career where you can just stay at home and work from home? Think about these things. But before you even do that, and I think I'm hitting on something, I know I'm hitting on something. First, you have to know who you are. Learn about yourself. What do you like to do? Do you like being told what to do? Do you, what is your interpersonal style? Are you relational? Do you like to work by yourself? What's your personality like? Are you introvert, extrovert? Are you dependent? And when I mean dependent, I recognize a stigma around saying dependent. It's like saying you're relational. Lastly, like I was saying before in the previous slide, what do you want? Okay. So when we think about well-being across the lifespan, what we tend to see is that positive feelings grow after midlife, and negative feelings, or difficult feelings is what I like to call them, they decline. Now, older adults, while they report less anger, stress, and worry, they also have fewer social relationship problems. Now, it's something also to think about, within our society, and I mentioned it before, ageism. So this is the privileging of people who are about middle adulthood, and marginalization of people who are older adults. So people who are 65 and over. Something to think about overall is, we say we respect um, we respect we respect the older adults. We love them for the contributions that they have. And at the same time, there's a lot of invalidation for older adults. There's negative portrayals of older adults within the media, right? So there are also the presence of negative stereotypes. One of the stereotypes is that they drive very slow, they're forgetful. So, and as far as like, and as far as like working, right? Older adults are pushed out of the workforce. And when we think about it as well, right, there's differences in the ways in which older adult men are treated and how older adult women are treated, right? So when we think about older adult women, when we think about beauty standards, for example, right, there are creams that are made to make the wrinkles look less wrinkly, non-existent. And so think about the message that implicitly communicates to people about wrinkles, is that wrinkles, or when you get older, there's some negative things that happen to you as far as physical. So, I mean, yes, while older adults Do they report less anger, stress, and worry? Yes. However, there are other studies that have documented that older adults experience psychological concerns as well, such as depression, anxiety. And depression and anxiety are things that never really go away. And when there is the presence of ageism, that exacerbates it. I'll also provide you a link on what ageism is, if you're interested. Now, something to make note, at all ages, people are happiest when they're not alone. Let's pause for a moment. When I said that, was the immediate thought around romantic relationships? If yes, then that's the implicit bias of our society. If no, then you're onto something there. So when we think about not being alone, right? It tends to focus mainly on romantic relationships. Like you have to find the one, right? Um, well, that can be concerning because there's about 7 billion people on this planet. And so to find the one or someone that you think is the one, right, can be rather stressful. And it also impacts how you engage with that person as well. We don't talk a lot about how being alone could just not being alone, but um, some people are okay with being solitary and we stigmatize them for it. There are some people who feel that being with others or just being with someone it might be in a polyamory romantic relationship, or it might be in a platonic relationship. So connection is the point. Um, when we are authentically connected to ourselves and to other people, we experience growth and we experience sense of energy, clarity, and positive emotions. And I'm talking about being happy. So you don't have to be in a romantic relationship to be to not be alone. As long as you are in an authentic connection, that's really, I mean, I'm not saying that's all you have to be. If that's what you want, then that's your business. And consider the ways in which our society has facilitated our understanding of romantic relationships or just relationships in general. Now, death and dying, when we think about grief, for example, grief is that period where you're mourning, you experience difficult emotions, and that emotion is grief. Okay. Now, grief the intensity of grief depends in the event that there's sudden death or unexpected times, right? And it varies from culture to culture and individuals within culture. Grief looks different. Sometimes you might go up and then down. And it's not a linear process. Um, there are times when you'll be better than most days, and then other days where it will be really hard. When we think about unconfirmed beliefs, right? Uh, expressed grief that is like really quick is not necessarily purged quicker. It might mean that that person might be coping in a different way for themselves. And when we think about adjustment time, with or without grief counseling, it's equally effective. The point is, it just takes time to experience healing. Now, for people who are, terminally ill or grief stricken, they don't necessarily go through those identical stages. For them, it might just be different. So how does death and dying impact, the person's loved ones, right? So if we notice here, the year of the spouse's death, right? So this is life satisfaction, and this is time. So notice that this person has been dying for quite some time. Okay, and notice we have a great dip in life satisfaction, and it goes to 6. Okay, this is the year that the spouse died. However, notice that over time it increases, but then it levels off. The point is that, are you ever back to where you once was? No. And people learn, and during that time, you learn coping strategies that assist with that loss, with that human loss. And I also make the argument for a relational loss. So think about somebody who does have a spouse, right? Not only did they have a human loss, there's a relational loss, a change in your relational roles. And that can exacerbate the grief or life satisfaction that a person experiences. Okay. So that's it for the rest of the lecture. This will be put up on YouTube for you to watch. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact and email me. And that's pretty much it.